So the 2021 academic year for higher education has had a rough start. It's been marred by weeks of student protests against the cost of higher education, of course. Several universities have now allowed qualifying students with historical debts to register. But some campuses are planning to embark on more protests as talks have actually deadlocked. Our reporters are covering the story across 3 major cities. They join us now live. Dasen Thathiah is in Durban. Ayesha Ismail is in Cape Town. Silindelo Masikane is in our Joburg studio. Dasen, we'll start with you. It's been relatively quiet there in Durban over the past week, hasn't it? But that doesn't mean that these protests are over.
No, not at all, because although these campuses are quiet now, and I'm talking about DUT, UKZN, MUT and other campuses here, there are still issues that exist, and there are issues that students feel have not been answered fully by the managements of these respective institutions. Now, you know that there are these common issues which are actually students have been talking about across the country and not just here. That is about the historical debt, the talk about the laptops, the devices that they need for learning, as well as things like student accommodation. But then what also complicates the situation is that there are also campus-specific issues that some of these students have at the various institutions. Now, for all of this time, UKZN has been fairly quiet, but that doesn't mean that their students have been happy. It just means that they've been negotiating on a more quiet level with the management of that institution about how they can actually move forward. And to some extent, they had reached certain agreements, but it's now that they feel that all of the undertakings that were given to them by management had not been carried through. So let's just listen to the conversation that I had with the UKZN SRC president about these issues that they are currently facing as students.
A majority of our issues that you are currently facing even now, we have a problem of NSFAS appeals, whereby NSFAS is misleading our students and telling them that they are opened. Yet when they come to us and when we communicate with the university, there is no appeals that have been opened as yet. Now those students that are supposed to appeal are now facing financial exclusion. We have students that have historical debts as a result of NSFAS. Those students are told that they are funded from 2018 up until now. Yet when we communicate with their financial offices, they are being told that they are owing the university from 2018 up until now, and that amounts to 250,000 rands, meaning that those students will not be registered. Their funding is not confirmed by NSFAS. Then we have issues of bursaries that have not confirmed funding for students. So the students are not cleared, they are not registered even now.
Of course, we were saying that the protest action is nowhere close to ending, and there was protest action at UKZN's Pietermaritzburg campus today.
That's right. In fact, that was the first of the UKZN campuses this time around where the protests had started. But this didn't come as a surprise because the SRC had met. In fact, they even met today on the Westville campus. That was one of the meetings that they had held. And this was one of the decisions that would be embarking on protest action now going forward. I just got a statement a short while ago from UKZN, and they had confirmed that. They said that about 120 students were protesting at the Pietermaritzburg campus, but they also reiterate in that statement that they are still constantly engaging with the SRC, and they say that they have an open door policy. But despite that, students are not happy, even though there was a response of some kind that was given to them today. They say that they'll still stand in solidarity with other students at other campuses, other UKZN campuses, that is. So let's listen to Spelele Shangase, who's from the Pietermaritzburg campus's SRC.
Our aim, and we are sending a clear message to the EMC. We have had numerous engagements, we have had agreements that were supposed to be implemented. Until this day, those agreements were never implemented. We had an agreement of having a blended approach for first-year students. There was going to be a dedicated week that the first-year student would come and be assisted on campus. We had an issue of students being financially clearance. There was a period last year where students were not staying at residences. There was going to be a reimbursement for those students to assist them to register. Until this day, those issues haven't been implemented, and we are saying to the university, we won't allow any staff to come in unless they are here to assist students on campus. Reason being, the online learning is not online learning and online registration is not working for UKZN. The UKZN staff was never inducted for the online learning. It is still failing. To be frank and telling you the truth, we never had an online learning. It was a distance manual learning. At the morning, we met the campus director. We submitted the memorandum. We had issues that are centrally based, or the issues of NSFAS, the issues of PGCE. Those issues we understand well that they cannot be solved today. But our message is very clear, and also to the national, is that we're going to continue with striking, we're going to continue demanding. Until then, we're going to continue shutting down UKZN.
All right, let's move to Cape Town. Ayesha Ismail is there for us. Ayesha, this, of course, is all about funding issues, right? Students who can't afford to go to higher education institutions. Today, Naspers and AfriForum battling out. What did we hear in court?
So, Shahan, today the lawyers representing AfriForum argued that they wanted the court to set aside the decision by Naspers to withdraw the funding from about 5,000 students. They say that that was unlawful and even unconstitutional. And what they're asking for is for the, because what they're saying is that qualifying students actually received SMSs and from Naspers saying that you will be granted funding. And on this basis, they went back to university last year. They tried to register because there was a legitimate expectation on their side that they would be able to continue with the academic year and that they would be funded by Naspers. And then just very abruptly, they were informed to say that they had been defunded. But I'm now joined by the advocate representing AfriForum and representing about 130 students, Advocate George Diamond. Advocate, you spent quite a long time trying to convince the judge as to why Naspers, the decision by Naspers should be withdrawn and set aside.
Yes, as you have said, and just to give a little bit more context, what happened to the students last year, they received information, each one of them communication that they qualified. They commenced their studies, Naspers started to pay up until half year, and after that it was abruptly stopped without prior communication and without having the opportunity to address Naspers. Now, what this case was about is to say that is unconstitutional. There is at least, if not more, but at least, a legitimate expectation on the part of the students that it should be communicated to them beforehand if Naspers intends cancelling their funding, and then they should have the opportunity to address Naspers prior to doing so. This did not happen in this case. And we asked the court to declare that as contrary to the Constitution, contrary to the Promotion of Administrative Justice Act. And this is what we were busy now. What happened is we had 3 students to which exactly that happened as co-applicants. And then also as a third leg, we asked the court to certify a class and to make it applicable to a class of students which comply with the same requirements. So, yeah. So the argument to date was quite long, and it had all 3 parts. Also, the question of the class action judgment was reserved. We are confident after the argument, and we'll wait the outcome.
But Advocate Diamond, we also heard in court today about one of the reasons why the funding had been withdrawn from about 5,000 students was because students had allegedly entered incorrect information on their applications and in some cases fraudulent information. And this was based on information allegedly that Naspers got from SARS, but that turned out not to be true.
Yeah, I can say this. I don't want to speak on behalf of Naspers, but I can say this. I think it's fair that it was simply not true that Naspers had information from SARS on which they based their decision. It was not correct.
And what we heard was that that information actually came from a credit bureau.
Yeah, it came from a credit bureau, and the methodology of which was very questionable as to how they assess the income of students.
Thank you so much for your time. So, Shahan, of course, the students that are still sitting without funding will have to wait a little longer to find out what will happen in this court case. As we heard earlier, that judgment has been reserved, and also will be interesting to see the implications of the outcome of this court case.
Let's come to Johannesburg. And Silindelo Masikane, of course, you covered those fees protests at Wits University and UJ over the past couple of weeks. You've managed to speak to some students now, today. What are they saying?
Well, the feeling on the ground, Shahan, is that those protests are justified and that it is unfortunate that students continue to be the ones blamed for what, government officials and those in leadership in the sector call as disruptions at the beginning of every year. They're saying that this issue of fee-free higher education has been on the agenda for years now. It's not the first time we're seeing it. And in fact, that these protests are yielding results. They might be slow at a slow pace, but they're certainly helping some of those students that qualify to continue with their studies but are financially excluded. I actually had an opportunity to speak to two of these students who benefited this year alone from the student protests, who qualified academically but just did not have the finances to register. Let's take a listen.
I think the protest that was created to make sure that students do register was very fruitful for some of us, because I was one of those students who were financially excluded, and now I got a chance to register because of SRC and other students who protested. So I feel like it was very beneficial for some of us, and I wish it can continue for some of those students who didn't manage to register. And I hate it when politicians say that Jacob Zuma did a wrong thing when he announced the free education. There was nothing wrong about that. We deserve free education. He had to announce that free education, and then all they needed to do is to implicate it and make sure that, okay, it's happening. And I think some of the students are not going to get the opportunities because they are not given that opportunity to go study, even though they got A's, because I was one of those students who got A's, but I was unable to register. So there are some of those I know, and they still not registered. So it's a very sad story, but I would like to congratulate SRC for fighting so much for some of us, and thank you very much for doing that. And I hope some of the universities here in South Africa would see that, okay, there is a need for free education.
With this financial thing in higher education, I think it's very unfair, because some students, just like he said, get very high marks, but then they are unable to register because of funds. And student financial aids like NSFAS, they don't have money to support these students, because most of the money is used by politicians to maintain their luxurious lifestyles. So I think it's very unfair for these students that they are unable to continue with their education because of financial crisis.
And what about the involvement of Chapter 9 institutions in this matter?
We know that they are watching developments quite closely, Shahan. We know that following the very violent protest that ended up with a man actually dying, who was not even involved in these protests, Chapter 9 institutions are now basically going to be watching government as well as the sector with a very close eye to ensure that there is a solution to this crisis, and that 2021 be the last year where we see students having to go to the streets at the beginning of every year. Let's take a listen.
It's extremely important for the South African Human Rights Commission, and I think for the country on the whole, that a speedy solution is found to the ongoing crisis around higher education, especially when we talk about funding and the resultant student protests that come out of it. Simply because ultimately it does impact on the right to education. For that right to be realized, you need to obviously have access to education. You should be sitting in classes, you should be able to engage in lectures. And we know that there is obviously a massive impediment, or there's a massive impediment to that when there are ongoing protests. But beyond that also, when we have a situation whereby students aren't able to access education purely on the basis that they don't have the money for that. So for the South African Human Rights Commission, it is imperative that this matter be resolved as soon as possible.
And Slee, what's the South African Union of Students saying about these protests and why they were stopped?
Well, we know, of course, that the Union of Students, the SA Union of Students, is an umbrella body that basically represents all SRCs across the country. And what we understand when the shutdown was ensued, that majority of SRCs had said that they want to shut down and students want to take to the streets. Now, following engagements with government and leaders in the sector, then there was another resolution from the SRCs across the country to say that we want to call off the shutdown because we want to take our struggle into boardrooms. And basically, students were really struggling, or should I say the SRCs were struggling to really get those numbers on the ground. So what they thought was, you know what, let's call off the shutdown, and that's because majority of SRCs are saying that, and let's continue with engagements in boardrooms. But what we are seeing now is that allegations that there are probably student leaders who are using the plight of students to kind of further their political aspirations, and that is why the national shutdown was called off, and that's to appease leaders in government positions. But speaking to one of the representatives from the SA Union of Students, he was saying that they deny this allegation, saying that they are a body that is for the fight and the plight of students, and that, you know, just because we're in an election year, it doesn't mean that that will be compromised. Let's take a listen.
We are acting in accordance to the mandate that deviated from that mandate, subject to whatever case that there might be. So now, when any individual or any political structure, be it student, non-student, anybody, if they come and say that SAUS, for instance, is saying that there is no need to protest because it might jeopardize the electoral chances of a specific or a certain political organization in South Africa come October, November local government election, that would be false, and that would be inconsistent with how we operate. So that would be just a demagogue, rhetorical statement trying to get some traction from the media or whichever institution that they want traction from. But unless they can prove that empirically, that we are acting in that way, and then once they've proved that and produced the evidence to you guys in the media,